Today on Real Deal, we're going to talk with Jimmy Brashear, an over 30-year veteran in law enforcement. So Jimmy, tell me, where did you start your law enforcement career?
I started with Pulaski County in June 1st of 1989, and the reason why I remember the June 1st is my daughter Sarah, my youngest daughter, was born June 4th of the same year. So as soon as I started, I had to leave for her to come into this world.
Awesome. And then, did you work in Pulaski County then? Or?
I did. I worked dispatch in Pulaski, and when I started working at Pulaski, I took a reserve commission with the city of Richland and worked patrol with them. And around December of that same year, I went to work full-time for the city of Richland as a patrolman.
So what did the city of Richland Police Department look like? That I know it's pretty small now.
It was, and it was basically the same building where they're at now. But we had 4 of us, and plus the chief. And Chief Daugherty was the chief one that hired me back then. And we had a lot of reserves, and it was like a Wild West back then. It was a crazy town, and our reserve, they'd all come in and work on the weekends. And if we arrest somebody, we had to leave a reserve behind because we packed a car full of officers. And every weekend we'd have fights in the streets or at the bars, and it's like the Wild West back then.
Sounds like mayhem.
It was. I've probably been in more bar fights and more pursuits when I worked for Richland in that short amount of time, 4 years with them, than I did my whole career with Camden County.
So you were with Richland for 4 years, and then you went to Camden County?
I did. Yeah, I was full-time with Richland for 4 years. I went... We said late at night when the whole town would die at 10 o'clock at night in Richland, so we'd listen to Camden County, and he's always waiting for them to call for backup on anything, and I always had a desire to work for them. And Tony Helms, who is our current sheriff, worked with me in Richland, and he got on with Camden County, and I was like, man, I want to go there too. So in July of 1994, Sheriff Page gave me the opportunity to come work for him. The only position that was available at the time was dispatch. So I thought, well, at least I'll get my foot in the door. Told the wife, I said, you don't have to worry about it. It's a little bit safer. No concerns there. And I'll dispatch until road slot comes open. And so I took that position in July. And then in September, I was scheduled to go to mules training, for dispatch. And September 22nd, I was scheduled to work, and I was sicker than a dog. And I told my wife that I just got to work tonight, and then I'm off for a few days before I go to school, and I'll make it through it. And she tried to talk me into staying home. I was like, no, I can't do it. So I went to work.
Hold on a minute. So you're working at Camden County, and how many people are on the Camden County Sheriff's Office at that time? How many deputies are working at one time?
At one time, 3. If we're lucky. After midnight, we may have 1 or 2 on.
So there's 3 working full-time deputies for the entire county?
Per shift.
Per shift?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I went to work that night. I was the only dispatcher scheduled to work, so I couldn't. That was another reason why I didn't want to call in sick. So I got to work that night, and the shift that I was working with was Sergeant Les Johnson's shift. And Tony Helms was on that shift with him, and Richard Dreyer, and a couple other, another deputy. But I went to work. Our shift was from 7 to 7, and I came in that night and got everything all ready to go. And Les Johnson, the sergeant, came in and said, he talked for a little bit. He goes, I think I'm gonna go home early because I had surgery. I had a cyst removed from my shoulder, and not feeling very good, and this body armor was rubbing on it. And I said, okay. So he left, and I remember it was almost 8 o'clock, and Les left, and probably about 10 minutes later, it felt like, he came back into the sheriff's office. And in our dispatch at that time, we said elevated, and we had a teller window like you have at a bank. Mm-hmm. So we said elevated, and so we're about the same height as we're sitting with somebody standing at the window talking to us. So the door came back open, and Les walked back into the office, and he was bleeding from the head. And I thought, well, maybe he fell down outside down the stairs. And he came to the window and he just stood there at the window looking at me with blood coming down. I thought, that ain't right. So I got on the radio and I called for the Camden City unit to respond over to help me with Les, which was Larry Bowling at the time. And I unplugged from the radio and I went around and I opened up the door. And as soon as I opened up the door, Les says, "He's got my gun, shoot him." And at the same time, I saw a gunman squatted down below the teller window in the corner, and he was bringing his gun up at the same time and saying, "Do what I say or I'll kill you." And I drew my gun without even thinking, I had my gun out, but Les was between us and I couldn't get a good shot. So I backed out of the doorway. And the first thing that went through my mind was, when I got out of the doorway, I looked down the hallway and there was an exit sign. I thought, I could head up the exit. And I thought, no, I'm not going to leave Les. He's been hurt, and I'm not going to leave him. So I then went into the mode of trying to find a good place for a cover. And I looked to the right, and in the hallway on the right side, there was no dispatch area. That was all glass walls. And I thought, that's not going to be a good area. And then I looked to the left, and there was an office there in a cinder block. And I thought, well, that'd be a good spot. But then I thought, Les is over 6 foot tall, and I don't know how tall this bad guy is, so I'm not going to get a good shot if he comes through the door with Les. So then I thought, I'll just wait here next to the threshold of the door and wait for them to come through and confront the bad guy at that point. And I thought, as soon as Les has breached that doorway, I'd grab him and throw him down the hallway and engage the gunman. During that time, everything's, you're thinking about your life because you know you're about ready to die, because you got to accept that. And I was sitting there going, who's going to take care of my family while I'm gone? And then, if my wife's going to be okay, my kids are going to be okay. And I thought, well, the department, they'll take care of them. And then just accepting that death, I had to make myself right with God at that point and ask Him to be with me, and knowing that I was going to be with Him if this gunfight turned out to be bad. So I did all that, and I thought about, did I load my gun for the night or before I came to work? Because I always unloaded it at home with my little girls, because Sarah was 5 and my oldest daughter Mindy was 7, almost getting ready to turn 7. And I always unloaded it at home. And I couldn't remember if I loaded it before I came to work. So I thought, I don't want to turn around and engage him and the gun go click. So I worked the action and I saw the round go out. I thought, okay, I'm loaded. And then I was like, all right, I'm ready to do this. And then I thought, why is it taking them so long to get through that doorway? So I did a quick peek. And when I did the quick peek, the gunman was behind Les and had him like this and was getting ready to bring him through the doorway. And I was like, okay, here we go. So as soon as Les breached the door, I reached up and grabbed him and threw him. And I thought I threw him down the hallway, but instead he went straight into another door right across, which I didn't know that. And it spooked the gunman. He jumped backwards and he hit there had a metal ledge, like where you ride on that teller window. He hit that and he dropped to his knees. And when he dropped to his knees, he brought his head down and brought the gun up. And at the same time, I was coming around the door, threshold, and I shot, and I went back around the side of the wall. As soon as I shot, I heard Les screaming, and I was like, man, I hope I hit him, because if I didn't, when I came back around the second time, he knows where I'm at. So I was like, okay, here we go for the second time. And I came back around for the second shot. And when I came around the second time, he was already standing up. But he did this like a cartoon type of wobble where he did like a little 360 and then he just fell over. And I followed him through as he's down on the ground and the blood was pouring out of the top of his head. And Les was screaming, shoot him again. And I was like, Les, he's dead. He's not breathing. And the blood was just pouring out. And I saw when I was drawn down on him, I saw a lump in my wrist. And I looked at that, and my middle finger was just hanging on by a piece of skin. And I thought, man, I've been shot, because he didn't feel it. You don't, under that stress, you just don't feel getting hit. And I told Les, I said, Les had been hit, he'd been shot, and he was getting weak on me, and he was standing by the door, and I grabbed him and I took him into dispatch and propped him up against the wall, and I went over and got on the radio and I called for all units to respond to the office, shots fired. And then I thought, well, I better call an ambulance, but my gun, I don't know if it was a tendon or the muscles or what, but the gun was still in my hand. I had to peel it out, I couldn't just release it. So I got the gun in my hand, I got on the telephone and I called for an ambulance. And then the phone was ringing, and the first phone call I got was from the sheriff's wife asking what was going on, because she worked at Osage Beach at the time. And I told her what happened, and she goes, I'll get a hold of the sheriff and let him know. And it's okay. And then the phone kept ringing, and I thought, I'm not going to answer the phone no more. I'm shot,
Right.
and I don't want to do that. And then Larry Bowling was the first one into the office, and I wasn't bleeding at that time because all your blood leaves your extremities and covers your main body parts. And I wasn't bleeding much. And then Larry came in, and I started relaxing after that point. And then Tony came in, and a couple of other officers came in. They all started rolling in at that same time. So I started relaxing, and then the blood just started squirting everywhere inside dispatch. And I told them what happened, and they took me out of dispatch and took me back in the other room and called for the first responder, the fire department, to show up and attend to our wounds. And
So from the time that you first saw Les to the time that you got shot, how much time passed in there? Was it minutes or?
So our 911 recorder picked up me on the radio, calling for Larry, and it picked up the gunshots, which was kind of crazy. They hadn't figured it out, but we had a speaker out there in the lobby where people could push it and talk to the dispatcher through the window, and they were thinking that picked it up. But from when I called on the radio for the CDO to come help me, and then the first shot fired was 12 seconds. So I imagine from when I actually saw the gunman to when I fired the shot was probably closer to 6 or 7 seconds.
So a lot of your life changed in 6 or 7 seconds.
It did, a lot. And it's amazing how much that you can think, and in that 6 seconds, like time stood still, but you were able to comprehend what you needed to do, and thinking about my family, thinking about God, dying, and all that, and in all of that 6 or 7 seconds. But it felt like eternity. And that room where the lobby is probably about a 5 by 7 room. It's really small, lobby. And both of our guns going off at that time, it still felt like I had earmuffs on. It wasn't loud at all. Our muzzles was so close. Our muzzles were probably about 12 inches away from each other when we shot. And I had powder burns embedded in both of my hands from his blast, and which I didn't even know he even shot. I didn't feel it, didn't hear it, nothing like that, because we shot exactly at the same time. And he got me in the hand, and the way I had my hand position, for shooting him, if he was just off an inch, it got me in the head.
Sure.
And with his head down, I shot him directly right in the top of his head, and the bullet went straight down his brainstem, which killed him instantly. But it was just amazing that he was still able to stand up after shooting him down his brainstem, and before he fell over.
Sure. So what was his issue? What was his? Do we know?
So earlier that day, the night before, his vehicle, he's from Gravois, and his vehicle broke down down Hawatonka off of D Road, and the deputies that night towed his car, and he came in early that morning and talked with Gary Bowling. He was on duty during the day that day, and was talking to him and trying to get his vehicle back. And he said that he had 2 guns in the car, that he's wanted to trade the guns for the tow bill. So Gary said, I'll go call the tow company and talk to him and get it worked out. So Gary did that. And when he came back out to the lobby to talk to the bad guy, he was gone. And nobody saw him until later that night. So what happened was We think that he was hiding in some bushes across the street from the sheriff's office, because it was before there was a parking lot there, it was just old buildings and bushes. And back then we didn't have cages in our patrol cars. And Les didn't lock his car, and when Les came into the office, Richard Dawson was the guy's name.
Okay.
And Richard jumped in the back seat of Les's car and was hiding in the floorboard. And when Les got into the car to leave, to go home, Richard Dawson jumped him from behind, and Les dragged him out of the car, and they fought in a parking lot. And the guy saw Les getting ready to kick him, and grabbed his foot and flipped him up, got him on his back, and got his gun out of his holster, and he pistol whipped Les out in the parking lot. And he worked the slide, and he had a bullet in his hand from the slide when he ejected that round. He pointed to Les's head and said, "I'm gonna kill you." And he goes, "No, I'm gonna wait till I get you inside and kill everybody." So that's when he took Les hostage.
Okay.
And it was about 8:04 that night, because I looked at the clock whenever Les came in, because I thought he hadn't been gone for very long. But so when he came in through the door, and when Les walked through the door, Richard Dawson low crawled behind him and got in that corner where I couldn't see him from the teller window. And that's where we're at on that.
So that happens, you go to the hospital, apparently your finger's gone.
Yeah, so I went to the hospital. One of our water patrolmen, Rod Cedarwall, drove me to the hospital, which was a pretty scary ride. But he got me to the ER, and they stabilized me, and I had to wait for my wife to show up before they would take me into surgery, which I don't know why, but they wanted to wait on her to get there. So they stabilized me. They wouldn't give me no pain pills or anything like that, and the pain was really setting in. It was hurting really bad. Probably one of the most excruciating pains I've ever felt to this day, and just felt like somebody taking a sledgehammer and just beating your hand, and just with a hot iron and everything else. It just really excruciating pain. So they stabilized it, and back then we had to buy our own uniforms, our own gun, badges, and everything. And they were starting to cut my clothes off. So don't cut my clothes, because that's the only uniform I got. So, and then I was like, man, I hope I didn't defecate in my pants or anything, or peed on myself during all this, which I didn't, when they were taking my clothes off. And I got stabilized, and the whole ER back then was a pretty small ER at Lake Regional. And all the officers from Osage Beach and Camdenton and the county, and everybody was bombarded the ER, and trying to ask me questions of what happened and things like that. And when she finally showed up because we lived in Richland at the time, and it took her a while to get there, I had an officer escort her up there to the hospital. So when she finally got there, we had things worked out, and I told her, I apologized to her, saying that I'm sorry I lied to you, saying that it's going to be a safer job being a dispatcher than working the road. And 3 months working there, I ended up getting into a gunfight. So
And what year was this?
This was 1994.
So 1994. So since 1994, you've been at Camden County the entire time.
The entire time. So after my surgery, they did I want to say 4 or 5 surgeries on my hand. And the first surgery, they stabilized it. The second surgery, he was going to amputate my middle finger because it was blown off. But he came back in, and they looked like I had a porcupine. I had rods stuck in all my fingers. The bullet, the way it traveled, it hit my middle finger above the knuckle, blew it off, and it hit the grip of my gun, entered back into my hand, and traveled down my ring finger behind the knuckle, blew it all out, hit my wrist, broke my pinky in the back of the wrist, pinky bone, and then bounced off and landed behind my wrist. So once the doctor got in there, he's like, there's too much damage, we're going to have to remove both your fingers, your middle finger and your ring finger. I was pretty devastated at that point, because I'm like, I can't be a cop with 2 fingers gone, main fingers. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I was pretty devastated. And I asked, trying to make light of the subject, I asked Doc, I said, is there a way you can just salvage parts to make one good finger, since my middle finger's blown up in front, on top of the knuckle, my ring finger's blown behind the knuckle, and just match them all together and make it work. And I didn't think that he would say anything that he could fix it, but he did. He goes, I got a friend in Columbia that I'll make a phone call and see what he can do. And he called him, and luckily enough, the doctor in Columbia just went to some training on reconstruction like that. So he goes, I think we can do it. So he stabilized everything. He did have to go in and amputate the middle finger above the knuckle, but he left the ring finger as is with the rods in it and stuff. And I went to Columbia after that, and he's changed it all around, got it all worked together, and he had to use muscles and tendons from both fingers to make one finger. So at first on rehab, I couldn't move my fingers at all. And then one night I just said, well, let's try to move in both fingers, like I'm moving my ring finger and my middle finger at the same time, and it wiggled. I thought, it's going to work.
Yeah.
And then after, I had to think about doing it with both fingers, but after time, your brain takes over and you don't think about moving both fingers, and it started working.
So you can still shoot, you can do everything that you could do before.
So after all the surgeries was over with, I was going to rehab, and then part of it was getting retrained on how to shoot. So I went through about 6 months of rehab of shooting and operating my handgun, and got it to the point where I could shoot again.
So how do you think that's affected your career as a law enforcement officer since that happened? Has it changed the way you think? Has it changed the way that you teach young officers? How has that affected your career?
It has. During that time when I was out of the hospital, when I first released the hospital, we had to buy our own guns. So they took my gun for evidence, and nobody gave me another gun, and I was a poor deputy back then, so I didn't have any extra guns. So it was really nerve-wracking. Every time I'd open up the door to the house to go outside, I was always looking at the shadows, wondering if somebody's out there to shoot me, and I had no way to protect myself. And that played a lot of stress onto me. And after the shooting, every time my hand would hurt, I would replay the scenario over my head again, over and over again. And that probably bothered me more than anything during the whole shooting thing, was just reenacting that whole shooting every time my hand would hurt, because that lasted for over a year and about drove me nuts. And it was in the interviews, they interviewed me that night in the hospital, and things that we learned since then is officers need like 48 hours to 72 hours of sleep under a stress situation before they give their statements. And everything we learned too from that and law enforcement nationwide is, if it's a good righteous shoot, to give the officer another gun to show that confidence, saying, hey, you did all right, but we got to take your gun for evidence, and I'm going to give you this one. So I talk to my cadets all the time when I teach the cadets. I worked hard on my shooting, and during my rehab of shooting, my instructor had me go through some competition shootings, and I took first place in competition. And I've been doing competition shooting since then, and done very well and took first place. So my shooting ability's really enhanced. It made me a better shooter, actually, even though I lost part of my hand out of it.
So every time there's an incident like that, I know in the military you do an after-action review, and you think about what went right, what went wrong, what could we do better, what could we do, what should we have not done. Have you thought about that? I mean, obviously you've thought about it a lot. If you, going through your mind, what would you do different?
On that shooting?
Yeah, on that shooting.
Try not to get hit. Get a little faster with my shooting. I did play that over and over again on what I could have done differently, and really, the hand that was dealt to me, I don't think there's anything I could have done differently at all. And because I did play that over and over and over again.
Sure.
And one thing that really helped me during that shooting, and I helped other officers that's been involved in shootings, was the sheriff had me go to other agencies when they had an officer involved shooting and go talk to that officer and have like a little round table to let him go to what I went through and see what he's going through. And by doing that, I've done that like 4 times. And when I did that, every time that I talked to those other officers, it would kind of spark something that I forgot about that happened in mine, and kind of like that happened to me too. But it kind of helped us both to go through that
transition,
of to keep us insane, keep us going. And I think that's what helped me make it through, because I didn't get into alcohol drinking or drugs or anything like that, but I was able to talk to people about it, and they were able to talk to me. And I think that really helped me cope with my situation more than anything else. And that's what I tell my deputies, and my cadets and deputies, that if you are involved into a shooting, that not to separate yourself from the others, that you really need to talk to somebody about the shooting and what you're going through. And even if it's just a spouse, but your fellow officers, they're not going to know how to approach you and stuff like that. Because during my shooting, none of them came and visited me at my house. Some of them did come by the hospital and see me, but once I was out of hospital, I was kind of like in my own world without them in it. And I didn't get phone calls or really them checking up on me. I would call up there and let them know where I'm at on my stages of rehab.
So with everything that you've been through and all your experience, what do you see as the biggest challenges for law enforcement today in our county, and right here in Camden County or Pulaski County or Richland? What are some of the biggest challenges
for
the officers right now? Is it social media, or is it?
It is a lot more social media. Back then we didn't have really, cell phones were just coming in, and we didn't have internet back then. And so basically all we had is the newspapers. And now everything is on social media. And your body cameras, your car cams, you're being watched all the time, it seems like, under the microscope. And I tell the officers, I said, just do your job the way that you think you should do it, and do it properly. I said, it's going to protect, those cameras are going to protect you in the long run. And it has. We've had complaints on officers with body cams, or that had body cams, and we was able to review those videos and clear the officers from
Sort
their
it out.
wrongdoings. Yeah,
Sure.
but and always tell them that when you get into law enforcement, always expect the worst of things. When that time in Richland, Tony and I, we worked together on nights, and we always trained together, and we always asked ourselves the what ifs, and we practiced our draw techniques because we had new holsters and stuff, so we wanted to be proficient on those. But we always asked ourselves the what ifs, and we always assumed that day would come when we'd have to take somebody's life or be in a gunfight. And that helped me cope with that situation afterwards too, because it wasn't a surprise like, I never thought I'd have to shoot somebody. I always knew that opportunity may have to present itself, or I had to do it. So it helped me cope with that.
So I got to ask this question because I know people want to know, what kind of guns were they? What kind of gun did you have? And he had Les's gun, right?
Yeah.
If I understand correctly.
Yeah, they were both Glock 40 calibers.
Glock 40 calibers.
Yeah.
Okay.
And his was the round that I got shot with. I can't remember the name of it. It was the one that had the rod that stuck in the middle of the hollow point. And I just had a regular hollow point round that I shot him with. But they said if they would have had a better round, that Les would have had a better round than his gun, the way that the bullet traveled, it probably would have taken my whole hand off. But luckily the bullet didn't expand the way it's supposed to have. So hydroshock is what he had.
Okay.
Yeah, so he shot me with a hydroshock, and it didn't expand the way it's supposed to. But
So that's the real deal. That's the real story right there.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened, and I can't imagine going through that. That would be
No.
a daunting situation to face for a long time.
It was. And, having God in my life helped me a lot through that because, after the shooting, when I was in the hospital and going through the surgeries, I asked God to forgive him for putting me in that situation, and, Richard putting me in that situation, and I asked God to forgive me for having to take his life. That helped. And the support from the community is phenomenal that I had during that time. And I know our citizens in Camden County, they're law enforcement, pro-law enforcement, and same with Pulaski County. And I'm blessed to be able to have that support during my ordeal that I had. And one of the things after the shooting, I got all healed up. I went to patrol. I finally got on patrol, and I always wondered if I was going to react too fast next time because I didn't want to get shot again, or if I was going to hesitate. And you never know. And almost 20 years to the date, it was July of 2014. I had to respond to a check of well-being on a subject way up north of the county, and when I got there, I was with the guy's wife showed up because they were from Kansas City but had a lake home, and we searched the house for him. We couldn't find him, and he had a workshop out back, and she goes, "Let's check the workshop." I said, "Okay." So she goes out there, and he changed the lock on the door to the workshop, and she goes, "I don't have a key." She goes, "You have to kick the door down." And I said, "Oh, if you're okay with that, I'll do it." And through my years, I was thinking, I'm going to find him hanging inside from one of the rafters. And I kicked the door open, and it was daytime. And I kicked the door open, and I walk in, and I didn't have my flashlight on me. And I'm trying to get my eyes to adjust to the darkness because he had everything blacked out on the inside of that workshop. There wasn't no light coming in. And I was scanning, looking toward the rafters and stuff, and I kind of caught a glimpse of something in the far left corner of that workshop. And I saw something silver, and then my eyes adjusted, and there was a guy standing there with a gun pointed at me. And I thought, oh my. And the wife is right there by me, and I backed out of the doorway, and she's like, "I'm going to go talk to him." And I said, "All right, if you think you can, do it." And I got on the radio, and I was calling for backup, and she came out with the gun. She goes, "I got the gun. If you can go back in there and get him." And I said, "All right, let's do it." So I didn't wait for backup because they're at least 45 minutes away.
Sure.
So I go back in, and she's behind me when I go in, and the workshop's probably about 40, 50 foot long. And I get all the way back there to him, about from me to you, and I noticed he had another gun by his side pointed at me. And the wife saw it at the same time, and she grabbed him and started hugging and crying, and I thought, I can't shoot him because she's right there, and I thought my only opportunity is to go behind him and hit him with the taser and tackle him and get the gun away. So I thought, okay, that's the plan I'm going to do. So I get behind him, and I was like, as soon as I hit that taser, I got to run and tackle so he can't respond. And so I did that. I hit him with the taser, and she jumped back, and he locked up, and I grabbed him, and we went to the ground, and he tried to get the gun pointed, tried to come around on me, and I was holding the gun down, and he got 3 rounds off before I was able to get it away from him. And he was shooting. He had a revolver, a Judge with 45 long coats in it. And the same thing, those rounds are going right off next to my head, but it sounded like I still had earmuffs on. And I finally got it away from him, and I just thought, man, that's terrible. Almost 20 years anniversary, and I ended up with another gun incident. And through both of them, my first incident in '94, I was awarded the Medal of Valor and the National Medal of Valor and National Purple Heart and the Missouri Deputy Sheriff of the Year award. And during that time, I really didn't want the medals or anything like that because I had to take a man's life, and I didn't want to be rewarded for doing something like that. But as the years went by, and after having them, I look back, and I'm grateful that I got those from my agency. And then from that incident in 2014, I was awarded a second Medal of Valor for that, for saving his life and keeping him from hurting anybody. But I was like, I'm getting old for this. But, you know, my desire, even when I was laying in the hospital bed, the first time in '94 with my fingers blown off, I try to think of other things I want to do in life. You know, what other job could I do? And there was nothing that I wanted to be except for a cop, you know, law enforcement. And I pushed myself to do everything I could do as a police officer after that incident. And even after 2014, I was like, I'm still going to do it. I'm not going to hang it up. You know, I want to be a law enforcement officer, and I strive for that. And I worked hard at every division I was in. You know, I started off as a dispatcher, and I made it to patrol sergeant when I worked for Richland. And after I went to the road in Camden County, I made it to corporal and sergeant, and ran the jail for 8 years because our jail was brand new, and the sheriff was wanting me to help establish that, so I did. And then up to the point where I'm at the chief deputy of the sheriff's office now. So I always strive to push myself a little bit further in my career, and I had a wonderful career, and I wouldn't change anything about it. Even my shootings, if I knew I was going to get shot and at the beginning of all this, I would still want to be a cop because that's all I want to be.
Well, thank you so much for sharing the real deal, and we wish you the best of luck and no more shootings for you. And we look forward and wish you luck in your sheriff race and everything you do. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.